right, so today we're diving into a life that's really got me intrigued.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Major Coxon. I mean, this guy, he was like walking a tightrope, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
legit business, activism, and then boom, the criminal underworld, all at the same time. It's wild. And we're basing this mostly on his Wikipedia entry, which, by the way, it's packed with stuff.
We'll buckle up then, because with Coxon, contradictions are kind of his thing, even from the start.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Born in 29, rural Pennsylvania, and right off the bat, you see the ambition. Like
Yeah.
pre-civil rights America, right? This guy is running shoe shine stands,
Wow.
car washes. He's even getting into used car lots and dealerships. I mean, not exactly your typical path, especially for a young African-American back then.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, just to make those ventures work in that era would have been like incredibly difficult,
Right.
let alone with all the racial prejudice on top of it.
Absolutely. Opportunities were, well, let's just say limited. But Coxon, he's like, nah, I'm not playing by those rules, you know? And it wasn't just about him getting ahead. It feels like he was trying to like push back against how things were, create a space for himself.
Yeah, I see that. And then, right in the middle of it all, he goes and serves in the military in 46.
Almost like a pause, you know,
Yeah.
before the next chapter really gets going.
Yeah, pause.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, right? Because the military, even with its own problems with race back then, there's that structure, the discipline. I wonder if that played a part in how he approached things, like business later on.
Could be. Or even, let's be real, even in his dealings in the criminal world later on.
That's a good point. Okay, so let's get to the Rolls-Royce Lounge in Philly. He co-owns this glamorous nightclub with, get this, Stanley Branch, the activist.
Oh, wow. Talk about a mixed bag, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, it wasn't just glitz and glamour there.
Yeah, the Rolls-Royce is where those lines get really blurry. You have this hot spot, the city's elite is there, politicians, entertainers.
That was pretty quinky.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
But underneath it all, it was also a front. Illegal activities, connections to the underworld. Pretty ironic, huh? A place for celebration, but also for some shady business.
Man, it's like something out of a movie. The fancy front hiding a darker truth.
Exactly. And Coxon, he wasn't just some hands-off owner. Just look at his record. 17 arrests. 10 convictions. We're talking fraud, larceny, even a car theft ring. This guy was deep in it, not just dipping his toes.
Wow. And from what I read, he really made it big in the drug trade too, right? That's a long way from shoe shine stands.
It is. And what gets me is how he became this bridge between the African-American and the Italian-American organized crime groups. Like he was playing a high-stakes game, understanding the power dynamics, really navigating a dangerous world.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So on one hand, he's, up to his neck in organized crime, but then he's tight with Muhammad Ali, like close friends. That's a bit of a head scratcher.
It's definitely a contrast. Ali, right, the champ, symbol of black pride, fighting against the system.
Yeah.
And Coxon, working in the shadows. But they were close. Neighbors even. Out there in Cherry Hill.
Makes you wonder what that friendship was all about. What did they, see in each other?
Maybe it was ambition, both of them defying expectations. Ali, even with all his fame, he was still dealing with prejudice, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And Coxon, yeah, he's involved in illegal stuff, but he's also trying to build something for himself, maybe for his community, too.
And get this. Ali dedicates a win in 1970 to Coxon, calls him the future mayor of Camden. Bold move, considering Coxon's reputation.
It was. Shows how much Ali respected him, like he saw something in Coxon, maybe leadership potential, or just that audacity, that willingness to challenge the rules.
Speaking of which, Coxon does run for mayor of Camden in 72.
Oh, yeah.
Big swing, right? But was he serious about cleaning things up, or was it like a power grab?
It's the question, right? Especially with that campaign slogan. Most politicians start in office, end up arrested. I'm going to reverse that.
Wow. I mean, everyone knew his past. It's like he was almost owning it, daring people to judge him.
Yeah. Maybe it was genuine, wanting to make things better. Or maybe it was a calculated move. Tough to say for sure.
Well, he loses to Angelo Arricchetti, who ironically gets caught up in that abscam scandal later on.
Oh, right.
Maybe Camden just wasn't ready for Mayor Coxon.
Maybe, or maybe, like we were saying, he just didn't get how politics really work, all the alliances, the compromises.
Yeah, it's a whole different game. But anyway, whatever his plans were, they got cut short, tragically.
Yeah.
73, just a year after the election, Coxon's murdered at home.
And not a, quiet, peaceful thing
Oh,
either.
no.
It was brutal. Him, his companion, her kids, all bound and shot. A real message,
Yeah.
sent shockwaves through the whole city.
That's just awful. Sounds like something out of a gangster movie, not real life.
It does. It shows just how dangerous that world was.
Yeah.
Money, connections, even being friends with Ali couldn't protect him from that violence.
So who did it? Did they ever find out? Someone must have wanted him gone bad.
The theories are complicated. Just like his life, really. Main suspect seems to be the Black Mafia. Maybe a heroin deal with the New York Mafia went south?
The Italian Mafia. Man, what could have gone wrong that bad?
That's the mystery, right? Organized crime, it thrives on secrecy. Loyalty, fear, violence keep things in check. But when those break down, things get messy. Fast. And the thing is, they never solved it. All these years later, it's still a mystery.
It's crazy. It really shows you how tough it is to investigate organized crime, especially when everyone's so good at covering their tracks.
Exactly. It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing.
Yeah. You see these connections, these possible motives, but the full story, it's still out there.
Right. And there are even these names that keep popping up. Ronald Harvey, for one.
Oh, yeah, him. Didn't he end up convicted for something else?
Yeah, a massacre in D.C. Years later makes you think, what else was he involved in? And then there's Samuel Christian. His part in all this is even murkier.
It's also shadowy. But I guess that's what makes Major Coxon's story so interesting.
It is. It's not just like reading a biography. It's more like peeking into this whole web of, relationships, ambitions, betrayals. Makes you think about the good and bad in everyone,
Absolutely. I mean, this guy, he was a civil rights activist, a businessman, friends with Muhammad Ali, and a big player in the criminal world. How does all that fit into one life?
It's a real paradox, isn't it? And I think it makes us ask some tough questions, like how do we even judge a guy like Coxon? Can you separate the good he did from the bad, or do you got to look at it all together?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy to figure out.
Nope. But that's what makes this deep dive so well deep. It's not just about the facts. It's about wrestling with his legacy, what it all means.
It really gives you a look into a crazy time in America, too, right? Like all the social change, the racial tension, and everyone chasing the American dream, some in good ways, some not so much. So big question as we wrap up our look at Major Coxon. What can we, take away from all this? What have we learned from this journey?
Well, I think it reminds us that even the most, messed up lives can teach us something. We can see Coxon as a warning, right? Like what happens when ambition goes too far. Or we can see him as someone who, even with all his flaws, still did things his own way, achieved things that, shouldn't have been possible for him.
It's a lot to think about. We like to have our stories simple, good guys, bad guys, but Coxon shows us it's not that easy.
Right. Life is complicated. And maybe that's the biggest lesson here. Look deeper, question what you think you know, because even in the most contradictory lives, there's always more to the story.
So as we finish our deep dive, here's a final thought for you. How do you judge a life that was both good and bad? A life that still makes us wonder all these years later. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty heavy, a Louisiana Court of Appeals document. In this case, State of Louisiana versus Michael Louding. This case is really fascinating.
Yeah, it really gets into some complicated questions about, about our justice system, especially because, Louding was only 17 at the time of the crime.
Okay, so 17 years old, and the court is trying to decide, can a teenager, can it be so set in their ways, I guess you could say, that a life sentence?
Without parole.
Yeah, without parole is the only option.
And it's a question that we as a society are kind of always grappling with, right? How do we deal with young offenders who commit serious crimes?
So for our listeners today, our deep dive is really all about understanding how the court got to that decision, a life sentence for a 17-year-old. And to make it even more complicated, this is all happening after that Miller v. Alabama ruling from the Supreme Court back in 2012. Can you remind our listeners about that?
Oh, absolutely. Miller v. Alabama, that was huge. It basically said you can't just automatically give someone under 18 life in prison without parole, even if they're convicted of murder.
So it's not as simple as, murder equals life sentence when it comes to minors.
Right, exactly. The courts now have to consider, they have to consider the kid's age, obviously, but also their background, any mitigating factors, things that might help explain why they did what they did.
So not about excusing it, but understanding the why behind it.
Exactly. It's about getting the full picture. Miller v. Alabama, it's all about recognizing that juveniles have, well, they have a different capacity for change, for rehabilitation, than adults do.
So let's get into the specifics of this case, starting with the crime itself. We're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, October 21st, 2009. A man named Terry Boyd is murdered, shot, and killed while he was inside a house. Shots fired from outside, through a window.
Yeah, sounds like a scene from a movie, right? But it gets even more, well, more intense from there. Michael Louding confesses to the murder. And get this, he says he was hired to do it by the rapper Torrance Lil Boosie Hatch for $25,000.
Whoa, hold on. So we're not talking about some random act of violence here. There's a motive, a whole other story going on.
According to Louding, yeah. He claimed that Boyd had threatened Hatch, so this was a hit, basically, to, well, eliminate that threat.
And that's not all, right? Louding's confession, it didn't end there. He admitted to participating in, well, a whole string of similar shootings, all planned out ambush-style attacks.
It's really disturbing stuff. He confesses to being involved in the murders of Chris Jackson and Marcus Thomas, the shooting of Malika Holbert, and even a double homicide. The victims were Charles Matthews and Daryl Milton.
It's almost like he was on some kind of rampage, which makes his age all the more disturbing. Remember, Louding was only 17 during all of this.
Yeah. And that's what makes this case so complicated. Because you have these horrific crimes, but he's still legally a child. So the big question for the court was, did his age, and any mitigating factors, did those outweigh the seriousness of the crimes? Can someone this young really deserve life without parole?
So the court had to figure out where to draw the line.
Yeah, a really tough decision.
So let's look at Louding's defense team. What were they arguing? How were they trying to get a lighter sentence for him?
Well, they really focused on Louding's childhood. It was rough, to say the least. Lots of poverty, exposure to violence, just a lot of really difficult stuff.
So they were saying that environment, all those challenges, those things kind of push him down this path.
Exactly. They were building a case that all of those external factors played a huge role in shaping his behavior, that he was a product of his environment in many ways. And to support that, they brought in people who knew him.
Like family.
Yeah, family members, people who could talk about what it was really like for him growing up. They also had a public defender who was familiar with his history. All of these testimonies, they were meant to show that, that his childhood was really troubled, full of hardship.
It's not about making excuses, but it kind of helps you understand how someone ends up in this kind of situation, right?
Exactly. And they went a step further. They also had a clinical psychologist testify, Dr. Frederick Sauter.
Okay, so a psychologist, that's interesting. What did he add to the defense's argument?
Well, Dr. Sauter testified that it was very likely that Louding was suffering from PTSD, from all the trauma he'd experienced, And this was really important for the defense because it suggested that his mental state, it might have played a role in his actions.
So it wasn't just about, a difficult childhood, but the psychological effects of that childhood.
Right. And that was another key point in Dr. Sauter's testimony. He believed that with the right treatment, Louding could actually overcome his PTSD, that there was a real possibility for him to change, to rehabilitate.
So you have two very different perspectives here. On one hand, these multiple murders, and then on the other hand, you have this young man who might be struggling with some serious mental health issues because of his past. How does the court even begin to untangle all of this?
Yeah, and they didn't take it lightly either. They actually held 2 separate sentencing hearings. They really wanted to consider all the evidence, all the testimonies before making their decision.
Wow, 2 hearings. That's a lot. It sounds like they wanted to make sure they got it right. So what did they end up deciding? What swayed them?
That's the big question, and that's what we're going to get into next, because even after all that, all those mitigating factors, the court ultimately decided to reaffirm the life sentence.
Wait a minute. So 2 hearings, all that testimony,
yeah,
and they still went with life in prison. It sounds like something must have really tipped the scales.
You're right. There was another piece to this puzzle, and that we'll dive into next.
Okay. So the court held not 1, but 2 sentencing hearings. 2. They heard from the defense, the psychologist, and the family talking about Louding's difficult childhood.
It's true, and they took all of that into consideration.
And yet they still gave a 17-year-old kid life in prison. What was it about this case that made them decide that was the right call?
Well, the court said that while they did take all those mitigating factors into account, there was something else, something important that they couldn't ignore. Louding had a long juvenile criminal history.
So even though he was young, he already had a serious record.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's right. And that played a big part in their decision. They said they had serious doubts about whether he could really be rehabilitated. I mean, he'd already been involved in so much crime.
So it's like they saw that pattern and thought, okay, this is probably going to continue.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, there were reports that he was even involved in criminal activity while he was already locked up.
Oh, wow. So even while incarcerated, he was still engaging in criminal behavior.
Yeah, and that definitely made the court question his potential for change.
I see. So in their eyes, he was still heading down a dangerous path, no matter what his age was or what kind of childhood he had.
Right, it seemed like nothing was going to stop him. And the judge actually used this really strong phrase to describe him. He said that Louding was, quote, incorrigible.
Incorrigible. Wow. That's like beyond hope.
Yeah. It implies that the court believed there was no chance for him to change. No chance at all.
It almost feels like they thought he was beyond rehabilitation, even with, what the psychologist said about PTSD and all of that.
Right, and that actually brings us to a really important point in this case, and it's something that's been debated a lot. The defense actually wanted to bring in a mitigation specialist. Her name is Julia Yackel.
Hold on. A mitigation specialist. What's that?
So a mitigation specialist, they're kind of like investigators, but for a defendant's life. They spend months, even years, really digging into their backgrounds.
So getting all those extra details, all the stuff that might help the court understand them better.
Yeah, exactly. They talk to family, friends, teachers, anyone who can shed light on who this person really is, what their life has been like.
Makes sense. And they wanted her to testify about all that.
Exactly.
But wait, you said this was something that's been debated. Did they not let her testify?
That's right. The court wouldn't allow it.
Why not?
Well, they said that her testimony would have been hearsay because it was all based on what she learned from other people, not her own direct observations.
Okay, so it was like a technicality, a rule that prevented her from speaking.
Yeah, in a way. But it's more than just that. Think about it. Trying to understand someone's life without hearing from the person who's spent months piecing together their story.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, she probably had so much information that could have helped the court really get to know Louding.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so controversial. Some people argue that by excluding her testimony, the court might have missed some crucial information that could have changed their view of Louding, his potential to change.
Wow. So this wasn't just about the crime itself. It was about the process, the rules of the legal system.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the case, because on one hand, you have the desire to really understand a defendant, get the full picture. And then on the other hand, you have these procedural rules that sometimes get in the way of that.
And in this case, because of those rules, the court didn't get to hear what this expert thought about Louding's ability to change.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about the crime, about Louding's background, the court's reasoning, and now even some of the procedures of the court. But taking a step back, what does all this really mean?
It comes down to this question. Can someone who is so young, someone who has done these terrible things, can they still be considered incapable of change? Is it fair to label a 17-year-old as incorrigible, like the judge said?
It's really tough to answer. I mean, multiple murders. It's hard to imagine anyone coming back from that.
Right. But the whole idea behind Miller v. Alabama, that ruling, it's all about understanding that juveniles, their brains, they're still developing.
You don't always make the best decisions.
More than that, the parts of their brain that are responsible for thinking ahead, for controlling impulses, they're just not fully formed yet. And there's a lot of scientific research to back this up.
Okay, so you're saying that we have to consider those differences when we're sentencing young people who commit crimes.
Yes, absolutely. We don't ignore the crime. It's still serious, but we can't just throw away the possibility that they might be able to change, especially when they're so young.
So it's about looking at the whole picture, not just the crime itself.
Exactly. And I think this case shows how challenging that can be, especially when you're dealing with a crime as serious as murder. There's this constant tension between wanting justice for the victims and recognizing the potential for young people to turn their lives around.
When I think about this case, I keep coming back to that phrase, the worst of the worst. It's such a harsh label to put on anyone, let alone a 17-year-old.
I agree. It's a powerful statement, and it really highlights the moral dilemma at the heart of this case. Where is the line between recognizing someone's past and holding them accountable for their actions?
It's almost like there's a gray area here where it's hard to say what's right and wrong.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this case so interesting to talk about. It forces us to confront these uncomfortable questions, not just about the law, but about ourselves, too.
It makes you think about your own values, your own beliefs about justice and second chances.
Yeah, it's definitely not a simple case. But these deep dives, they're all about exploring those complexities.
And it's not just about Michael Outing, right?
Yeah.
This case raises some bigger questions about how we deal with juvenile crime, mental health, the purpose of our justice system, all of that.
It shows how these issues, these huge systemic issues, how they play out in individual lives. And it challenges us to really think about the things that lead to crime in the first place. Things like poverty, trauma.
Yeah. Thinking about Louding's tough upbringing, all the struggles he went through, it made me wonder, to what extent can we say that a difficult past excuses the choices we make as adults? Because we all have a past, right?
Right.
We've all been shaped by our experiences.
That's a powerful question, and it's one that each of us has to wrestle with on a personal level, because it gets to the heart of personal responsibility and how we choose to respond to the challenges that life throws our way.
Yeah, it feels like we're trying to balance those things all the time. Like,
Right.
how much do our experiences excuse our actions? How much are we responsible for?
It's a question that doesn't really have a simple answer. Every situation is different. Every person's life is different.
Right. And I think that's part of what makes these deep dives so interesting. They're not about finding the right answer all the time. It's about asking those difficult questions, having these conversations.
Exactly. And maybe even changing our minds along the way, or at least seeing things from a new perspective.
I think this case really shows that. Because on one hand, you have this young man who committed some truly horrific crimes. But on the other hand, you have this really troubled past, this difficult childhood that, well, that might have played a role in his actions.
And that's the challenge, right? How do you balance those two things? How do you hold someone accountable for their actions while also recognizing the factors that might have contributed to them?
Yeah, and this case also made me think about our justice system as a whole. It makes you wonder if our focus is more on punishment or rehabilitation.
That's a big question, and it's one that every society has to grapple with because we want to believe that people can change, that second chances are possible, but at the same time, there are victims, and those victims deserve justice, too.
And that's what makes these cases so complicated. It's not just about the legal arguments, It's about our values, our beliefs about right and wrong, and how we choose to deal with those who break the law. This whole case, it wasn't just about Michael Outing. It was about all of us as a society and how we deal with really complex issues. Juvenile crime, mental health. It was about figuring out where justice really lies.
Absolutely. And like you said, there aren't always easy answers, but that doesn't mean we stop asking the questions.
Right. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this deep dive, There's always more to learn, always more to think about. And it's okay to not have all the answers. But what's important is that we keep having these conversations. We keep challenging ourselves to look at things from different angles.
I couldn't agree more. These deep dives, they're all about digging deeper, exploring those complexities.
Exactly. And that's what makes them so rewarding, even when the topics are tough. So to all our listeners, thank you for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and we'll see you soon. All right, ready to dive into a story wilder than fiction.
Always up for a good story. Lay it on me.
We're looking at Melvin Williams.
Melvin Williams. Okay.
He went from, notorious drug kingpin to a community activist.
Wow.
And then even, get this, an actor on The Wire.
Really? On The Wire?
Yeah, The Wire.
Yeah.
It's quite a journey.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a heck of a path.
Yeah, how does someone navigate that, right?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, his story is practically ripped from the headlines of The Wire itself.
Exactly. The drug trade's impact,
Yeah.
communities caught in the crossfire,
Right.
people struggling within that system. It's all there.
It's all there.
And that's what we're going to untangle today.
Sounds good.
We got a Wikipedia article all about Williams' life and career.
Okay, Wikipedia.
Paints a pretty good picture, actually. The thing that gets me, the scale of his operation. Millions of dollars.
From heroin. Millions. Wow, it's almost unbelievable how someone goes from an ordinary life to, a drug lord.
Right.
He was born in 1941 in Baltimore.
In Baltimore, yeah.
His dad drove a cab. His mom was a nurse's assistant.
Really, nothing in his early life that screams future drug kingpin, huh?
Not really, no. Makes you wonder what leads someone down that road. What were the circumstances?
Yeah, like was Baltimore itself kind of a breeding ground for these stories?
I mean, it's possible.
And that brings us to another key player, Ed Burns.
Ed Burns, okay.
A Baltimore police investigator, heavily involved in the Williams investigation early 80s.
Oh, wow.
And here's the kicker. Burns later became a writer and a producer.
No way.
On The Wire.
On The Wire. Get out of here.
Yeah. See how deep The Wire goes? Real-life experience fueling the show.
That's incredible. So they weren't just making things up. They were drawing on real events.
Real events, real people.
Wow.
But for Williams, those investigations, well, they spelled his downfall.
Oh, I bet.
Arrested in 84, cocaine trafficking, and then boom, 34 years.
34 years.
That's a long time.
That's a lifetime.
To think about your choices.
Yeah, you'd have to do some soul searching, that's for sure.
But even in prison, they weren't done with him. The IRS, they hit it with a massive tax assessment.
How much are we talking here?
Over $425,000.
Ouch. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Right. But here's where things get interesting, I think. Behind bars, we start to see a different Williams. He gets really into the law, to the point he's helping other inmates with their cases.
Interesting. Was that genuine, do you think? Or just trying to work the system?
It's hard to say, right.
Mm-hmm.
But it shows a complex mind at work.
Definitely. And speaking of complex minds, you know David Simon, the creator of The Wire.
Yeah, of course.
Back in '87, way before The Wire, he wrote this 5-part series for the Baltimore Sun about Williams called Easy Money, Anatomy of a Drug Empire.
Whoa. Talk about foreshadowing.
Yeah.
What did Simon see in him, even back then? Why was he so drawn to his story?
Well, I think Simon was fascinated by the paradox of Williams.
The paradox.
Yeah, the intelligence, the charisma,
Uh-huh.
but also the ruthlessness of, a drug kingpin.
It's like a real-life Jekyll and Hyde.
Exactly. And Easy Money wasn't just a superficial look at a criminal.
Right.
It went deep into the drug trade, how it worked, how it affected people,
Yeah.
communities.
That's what Simon does so well, right? He dissects things.
He does, yeah.
Exposes the underbelly.
Makes you think.
Makes you think.
Yeah.
It's like Easy Money was almost a trial run for The Wire.
Yeah, I see that. Honing his craft, getting a deeper understanding before tackling it on a bigger scale.
Exactly. But back to Williams. In '96, after serving part of his sentence, he's released on parole.
Okay. You'd think after all that time he'd be ready for a fresh start.
Right. But sadly, that wasn't the case.
Really?
Yeah. 99, just a few years later, convicted again. Another 22 years.
Wow. It's like he couldn't escape that life no matter how hard he tried.
It really highlights how tough it is to break free
Right.
from that environment, even with intelligence, even with maybe a desire to change.
Absolutely. It makes you think about the lasting impact of those years in prison,
Yeah, like, did they harden him, make him more cynical? Or was there still a part of him that wanted something different?
It's a good question. A really good question.
And it's one we'll explore further when we come back.
It's easy to focus on Melvin Williams as this almost mythical figure, right?
Yeah.
But to really get his impact on Baltimore, we got to look deeper.
Deeper. Okay.
Beyond the headlines, into the fabric of the city itself.
I see what you mean. It's like his story, it's woven into those struggles Baltimore faced.
Yeah, yeah.
Poverty, addiction, institutions just not working.
Exactly.
He became a living example of those problems almost.
It's interesting, right? Because his own journey kind of mirrors this shift in thinking.
A shift. About what?
About drug policy, criminal justice reform. Society started realizing that just locking people up, it wasn't the answer.
It wasn't working.
No, rehabilitation, helping people reintegrate, that became the focus.
Giving people a real shot, a second chance.
Exactly. And that's what Williams was all about in his community work,
Correct.
right?
He wasn't just talking about it, he was out there doing it.
Think about his role in The Wire as the deacon.
Okay. The deacon?
Deeply involved in the drug trade, but then uses that experience to steer young people away.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of like a parallel to Williams's own life?
It's like the writers were blurring those lines on purpose.
Maybe, maybe.
Using his transformation to look at the drug war, the impact on people.
It makes you question things.
I bet it makes you think.
Can someone like Melvin Williams actually change after everything?
Can they do good after causing so much harm?
It's a tough question.
And based on his actions after he got out, the answer seems to be yes.
I mean, he really did dedicate himself to that community work, trying to fix the damage.
But I bet some people still saw him as a symbol of, a bad time for Baltimore. The drug epidemic left its mark.
It did, yeah.
Hard to forget that.
It brings up that question of forgiveness, accountability.
Yeah.
Can we forgive someone who profited from something so destructive? Can they ever really make up for it?
Tough question.
Really tough.
And what's interesting is Williams never hid from his past.
He didn't.
He kind of owned it, used it to teach others, to warn them.
I think maybe he saw it as a way to atone, to make amends for what he did.
And then there's The Wire. It played a role too, right, in how people saw him.
Oh, for sure. David Simon was fascinated by Williams long before the show even existed.
This true?
That series he wrote back in '87, Easy Money, that was all about Williams, his rise, his fall.
It's amazing how those early pieces foreshadow The Wire. The themes, the characters, the issues, it's all there.
Simon was already dissecting the drug trade, years before The Wire hit the screen.
And then bringing Williams onto the show, that blurs the lines even more.
Reality and fiction.
Yeah, it's like it shows how committed Simon was to authenticity.
To telling a real story.
And The Wire wouldn't be the same without that, right?
I don't think so.
It's what made it so powerful.
It's real. It's raw.
So we have Simon's vision and Williams's willingness to participate, to share his story, maybe even to find some kind of redemption.
It's like life and art feeding off each other.
And what's crazy is The Wire ended years ago.
Yeah.
But it still resonates. Those themes, the deacon, they still have an impact.
It's a powerful legacy.
It really is the power of stories, right?
Absolutely.
To make us see things, to understand these complex issues.
To give a voice to the voiceless, the marginalized.
Melvin Williams, his triumphs, his failures, they became part of that larger story.
He became a symbol of Baltimore, its struggles, its resilience.
It's like a reminder, even when things are dark, there's still hope.
Hope for change, for redemption.
It's a powerful message. It's like we all make mistakes, but it's how we learn from them that matters.
It's about growth, about transformation.
And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
We'll look at the lessons we can learn from Melvin Williams, from his life.
What his story means for us, for how we think about crime, punishment, redemption. It's a lot to unpack.
It is, but it's worth it.
So we've gone through Melvin Williams' life, the highs, the lows, drug empire to community activist.
And actor, don't forget actor.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
On The Wire. What a story. What does it all mean, though? Not just for him, but for Baltimore, for choices, for redemption.
Yeah, it's not a simple legacy, is it? He did a lot of bad, but also tried to do good. It's like actions and consequences all mixed up.
It shows that people aren't just good or bad.
Exactly. Like Williams shows us that people can be kind, but also destructive.
Sometimes all in the same person.
It's that gray area, Makes you think about accountability, forgiveness. Can someone like him, after everything, truly redeem themselves? What would that even look like? What would convince you that someone had changed?
It's a question The Wire asks, too. The deacon, Cuddy.
Right.
Trying to find their place after years in the game.
Trying to make things right. It's like Williams's journey, in a way.
It is, yeah. The Wire, it uses those characters to show the real struggles.
Reintegration, the system working against you, keeping people trapped.
And Williams, his story might be unique.
In some ways, yeah.
But it reflects a bigger problem.
Absolutely. Think about all the people affected by the drug trade.
With so many.
Both sides doing it and being hurt by it.
Their stories don't always get told.
It's easy to just see the numbers, the headlines.
Williams reminds us there are real people behind it all.
Real lives changed forever.
And he shared his story, good and bad.
He did, yeah.
Gives us a look into that world, that human cost. What do you think made him so open about it all?
I think maybe he wanted to warn others.
From his own mistakes.
Yeah. Use his experience for something good.
A way to make amends. And we have to talk about The Wire itself.
Of course.
It shaped how people saw him.
For sure. It was like art reflecting life.
Makes you wonder how he felt about being portrayed, seeing his life, even if it was fictionalized, up on the screen.
It's hard to know, isn't it?
Did it give him closure? Or bring back bad memories?
Art can be like a mirror, though.
Yeah.
Reflecting things back at us, making us face hard truths.
It's like his life became this cautionary tale.
About the dangers.
But also a story of hope, of redemption.
That's powerful, especially for people feeling trapped by their past.
Trapped by their choices.
Yeah.
Williams shows you can change, even after messing up.
We can grow. We can transform.
No matter what happened before.
But redemption, it's personal, right?
It is, yeah.
It has to come from inside. What do you think? Can society help make redemption easier? create an environment for it?
That's a good question. It makes me think we need to give second chances.
We do.
Believe that people can change and have systems that support that,
Absolutely.
not just punish them.
It's bigger than just Melvin Williams, though, right? Right, it is.
We all have the potential to be better, to do better, to find redemption.
So, wrapping up our look at Melvin Williams, what do you hope people take away from it all?
People are complicated.
They are.
Don't fit into boxes. We should hold each other accountable.
Yes.
But also recognize that people can change. Williams's story, as hard as it is, it shows the human spirit, the power of redemption.
It's about finding a better future.
Exactly.
Well said. Melvin Williams' life, it was a wild ride. Ups and downs, mistakes and triumphs. His legacy is complex.
It is, yeah.
But it shows that we can change, even when things are tough. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it made you think. Until next time.
All right, welcome in, everybody. We're diving deep today, going way back in time for this one. We're going to be looking at Michel Barrera.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And if you don't know who that is, don't worry. We're going to find out all about him. The FBI wants to have a little chat with him. Let's just say that he's wanted for some pretty serious stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got some excerpts here from Wikipedia all about him. You know, it's interesting how much information is online now.
Yeah.
And you might find yourself doing some extra Googling after this one, I think. So.
Yeah. What really draws me to this story is that he's potentially linked to another tragic unsolved case. So we're gonna get into that. But first, let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah, let's rewind. I want to know what did he do to get in trouble in the first place?
Right. So this all starts back in 1998 in the Miami area.
Okay.
And Barrera at the time was only 18 years old. And he and an accomplice decided to rob a bank. And they ended up getting away with over $20,000.
That's, pretty bold move for an 18-year-old, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Like, most kids that age are worried about getting their driver's license.
Totally.
He's out here robbing banks.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So I guess maybe he thought he was, in the clear. It was easy money because just 3 months later, they hit another bank in Miami.
What?
Yeah.
So they did it again?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But this time, things escalated very quickly. So after the robbery, there was a high-speed chase with the police.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. And during this chase, Barrera actually fired a shotgun at the pursuing officer.
Whoa.
Yeah. They ended up ditching their car, then carjacked another vehicle to get away.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
That is, that's some serious stuff. Like, what were they thinking at that point, you know?
That's what I want to know.
Yeah, you start with robbing a bank, which is already, pretty crazy. But then to, fire a shotgun at a police officer.
Yeah, that just shows like a whole other level of
willingness to use violence.
Yeah, could do whatever it takes to get away.
It's a whole nother level. So.
Yeah.
So they got away with the second robbery, but what happened?
So the accomplice was caught, but Barrera disappeared, vanished. Yeah, he managed to completely disappear. And for years, there was no trace of him.
It's kind of amazing how do you do that?
Right.
I mean, today, there's cameras everywhere. There's facial recognition. And this was,
back in the 90s.
98, yeah. But still,
it's impressive.
Yeah.
How do people...
It makes you wonder, what kind of life did they lead?
Yeah, exactly.
Always looking over your shoulder.
Having to create a new identity, probably moving around a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's almost like something you'd see in a movie.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to think about.
So we got Barrera on the run. He's managed to disappear. But then in 2007, there's this case, the Randy Gorenberg case.
Right.
Can you remind us about that?
Yeah, so Randy Gorenberg was a 52-year-old woman, and she was kidnapped from a mall in Boca Raton, Florida.
Okay.
Yeah. And very tragically, her body was found later. She had been shot, and she was dumped from her own car.
So, and this is where Barrera comes back into the picture.
Exactly. So, the Wikipedia article doesn't give us, all the specific details, but he became a person of interest in this case. And this is, almost a decade after he initially disappeared.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big jump. Bank robberies, okay.
Right.
But now we're talking, potential kidnapping and murder.
Yeah.
So what made them think that he might be connected to this?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like I said, the sources we have don't really go into detail about like what evidence might link him to this case.
But it definitely raises some questions, right?
Yeah, sure.
What could have possibly connected him, this fugitive, to this tragic incident?
Yeah, it seems like there's going to be some layers to this story. Right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that makes this even more complex is an informant suggested that Gorenberg's murder might actually be connected to gang activity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And
remember, Barrera has ties to the MS-13 gang.
Oh, okay. So now we got a fugitive, we got a potential murder, and we got a possible gang connection.
Exactly.
This is getting very interesting.
Yeah, it's a wild one.
Yeah.
It really is.
All right, well, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and unravel some more of this crazy story.
Sounds good. Yeah, it really makes you wonder, how deep does this go?
Right. Like, was he acting alone, or was this, like a hit ordered by the gang?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So many possibilities.
Yeah. Well, if there was a gang connection, why hasn't he been caught? You think the authorities would be, all over this.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But remember, Barrera, he's already proven that he can disappear.
Right.
He evaded capture for, almost a decade after those bank robberies and that shooting. Seems like he's pretty good at staying off the radar.
I mean, yeah, but still, for that long.
It's not easy.
It's got to be, changing your appearance, using fake names, always moving around.
Right. You got to cut off contact with everyone you know.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of cunning, a lot of resourcefulness.
Yeah.
It seems like Barrera has that, though.
So, he's living this, double life. But how's he supporting himself all those years? Was he, still involved in criminal stuff?
Well, the sources we have don't really give a clear answer on that.
Okay.
It's definitely possible he continued with, illegal activities to fund his life on the run.
Right.
But we're just speculating there.
Yeah. Okay. But here's something we do know. He was featured on America's Most Wanted, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that was a big deal back then.
Huge. America's Most Wanted was a major tool for law enforcement. It brought these cases into millions of homes.
Yeah.
It turned everyday people into, potential informants.
Oh, I remember that show, yeah.
Yeah, it had a pretty impressive track record of helping catch fugitives.
So did the show lead to any breaks in Barrera's case?
Unfortunately, not that we know of.
Really?
Yeah, even after being featured multiple times, he remained elusive.
He must have been watching, right?
Probably.
Oh, they're looking for me. Better be more careful.
Yeah, keeping one step ahead.
It's crazy.
It's wild.
So where does that leave us? Do we know, anything about where Barrera is today?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
As far as our sources tell us, he's still out there somewhere.
Still on the run after all these years.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's kind of unsettling, to think that he could be, anywhere.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What can we take away from Barrera's story then?
Well, I think it's a reminder that even in this, age of technology and surveillance and everything, people can still just vanish.
Yeah.
It says something about, human adaptability and survival, even when the odds are completely stacked against you.
And I guess it makes you think about the kind of life he's been living too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Is he constantly looking over his shoulder? Can he ever really escape what he's done?
Those are questions only Barrera can answer, really.
Yeah.
Until he's caught. I guess his story remains a mystery.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive.
Yeah.
From bank robberies to high-speed chases to a possible murder. Barrera's story is full of, twists and turns.
It really is.
And the fact that he's still out there just makes it even more intriguing.
Absolutely. It really makes you think, what kind of life has he built for himself? Has he created a whole new identity, or is he, like you said, constantly haunted by his past?
We talked about the impact on him, but what about, the victims and their families?
Oh, absolutely. That's a crucial point.
Especially in a case like Randy Gorenberg's, where there's still so many unanswered questions.
Yeah, the impact of these crimes goes way beyond just the immediate victims.
Right.
Families are left dealing with the loss and the uncertainty and wondering if they'll ever get any closure.
Yeah.
And when a suspect is still out there, that just adds to the unease,
It's got to be tough.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that these aren't just stories, they're real lives that have been affected by this.
For sure.
Yeah. But let's shift gears a bit and go back to the Gorenberg case for a second. I mean, that's like the most intriguing part of this whole thing.
Definitely.
And I'm still trying to wrap my head around Barrera's potential involvement.
Yeah, it's a puzzle.
Yeah.
We have these pieces of information, these potential links, but we don't have the full picture.
Right.
It's the kind of case that keeps investigators up at night,
Yeah, for sure.
trying to put all the pieces together.
Yeah, it really is like watching one of those, true crime documentaries.
Totally.
Where they give you all this evidence,
Yeah,
but they're always missing that one key piece.
exactly. And that missing piece usually just creates even more questions.
Right.
In Barrera's case, it's like, what was his actual role in the Gorenberg case?
Right.
Was he acting alone? Maybe he was desperate, he's on the run, needed money.
Right.
Or was it something more organized? Was the gang involved?
Yeah.
I mean, that informant's tip about gang activity definitely makes things a lot more complicated.
It really does. And it makes you think about how tough it must be for the investigators.
Oh, absolutely.
You get a fugitive, potential ties to a gang.
It's not an easy case.
Yeah. Where do you even begin with something like that?
Right. I mean, they got to go through tons of information, follow leads that probably go nowhere.
Yeah.
And they got to deal with, the whole gang world, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
All while trying to build a solid case.
Right. And this wasn't yesterday.
Exactly. It happened years ago.
So witnesses might have moved. Their memories might be fuzzy.
Yeah, evidence could be gone.
Yeah. It's a lot.
It's a lot to deal with.
And it makes me think about the motive, too.
Oh, the motive, yeah.
If Barrera was involved, why? Was it just about money? Or was there something else going on?
I mean, that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
The Wikipedia article, unfortunately, doesn't really say anything about motives.
Right.
So we can guess, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he needed Crash, like you said. Maybe the gang made him do it. Or
Right.
maybe there's a connection we haven't even thought of.
It's wild how one case can have so many possibilities.
It's the power of a good mystery. Right? Even with just a little bit of information, we try to fill in those gaps, come up with stories.
Right.
It's what makes true crime so interesting.
For sure. Well, you've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think the big thing to remember is that even now, with all the information out there are still mysteries out there,
Yeah.
And Barrera's story really shows that. The past doesn't just go away. There are questions without answers.
Right.
And sometimes the best stories are the ones that leave us wanting more.
Well said. So to all our listeners out there, what do you think about Barrera? What are your theories about the Gorenberg case? Maybe you'll find something we missed. Until next time, keep those minds working, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
All right, so are you ready to dive into a story? That's, well, it's packed with more twists and turns than a boardwalk roller coaster. We're going to be looking at the life of Hakim Abdul-Shahid, a figure who embodies this fascinating mix of contradictions.
Yeah, when I first looked at the Wikipedia article on him, I was just struck by the sheer range of his experiences. It's hard to reconcile the image of him as a devout young man with, the notorious drug kingpin that he later became, and then his turn towards helping others.
It really does. It makes you wonder what forces kind of shaped his trajectory. He was born Robert Edward Molly in 1959 in Atlantic City, New Jersey, to a large religious family. His father was a Pentecostal pastor, so faith was a central part of his upbringing.
Almost like the classic setup for a redemption story, right?
Yeah.
But then you learn that he earned the nickname Midget Molly because of his height, 5'2", and you start to see how maybe he was already wrestling with perceptions and trying to assert himself.
Yeah.
So,
and then there's the tragedy of losing his father at a young age. It's hard to imagine the impact that had on the family dynamics and on Robert himself.
Yeah, loss can be a real catalyst for change, pushing people in different directions. In his case, he found himself drawn to the Nation of Islam, which was a powerful movement advocating for Black empowerment during a time of significant social change.
And that's when Robert Molly becomes Hakim Ali Abdul-Shahid. It's a powerful statement, embracing a new identity and aligning himself with a group that was really challenging the status quo at the time.
Yeah, this name change isn't just about shedding a label, right? It's about actively choosing a new path, a new ideology. But this is where the story takes a sharp turn. And frankly, it surprised me.
Yeah, in 1980, at just 21 years old, Abdul-Shahid is convicted of attempted murder. and sentenced to 6 years in prison. It seems like a complete departure from the path he'd been on.
It makes you question, was this a sign of a darker side that was always there? Or was there something else that triggered this drastic shift? Was there an incident, a specific event, that pushed him towards this act of violence?
Yeah, the details around that conviction are still a bit murky, but
Yes.
what we do know is that when he got out of prison, he dove headfirst into the criminal underworld.
And he wasn't just a small-time player, right? He quickly rose to prominence, becoming a major drug trafficker. With connections to the Medellin cartel, we're talking 600 kilos of cocaine per shipment, moving across multiple states. This was a serious enterprise.
And he wasn't afraid to show off his success either. There's this almost legendary story of him walking into the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino Ballroom wearing a $1.5 million gold crown, surrounded by his entourage.
Yeah, that image is so striking. I mean, it speaks to his ambition, his desire for recognition, but also perhaps a sense of invincibility, a belief that he was untouchable. Do you think that crown was a symbol of power or a sign of something else, maybe insecurity?
It's a good question. Maybe it was a bit of both. But what's clear is that he was building a reputation, an image, and that kind of notoriety attracts attention, not all of it good.
Exactly. That leads us to 1989, when Abdul Shahid's reign comes crashing down. After a 7-month investigation, he's arrested along with 20 of his distributors.
The authorities suspected him of being involved in multiple murders, though he was never convicted for those. But his days as a kingpin were over.
And that infamous gold crown never recovered. It's almost symbolic, don't you think? Like a tangible representation of his vanished power.
It definitely adds to the mystique of his story. In 1990, he's convicted as a drug kingpin and sentenced to over 19 years in federal prison. But here's the thing, this isn't the end of his story.
It's actually the beginning of a whole new chapter, one that focuses on redemption. And that's what I find particularly intriguing about this case.
So we've got this complex figure here, shaped by a religious upbringing, drawn to a movement focused on Black empowerment, yet making these choices that led him deep into the criminal world. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it really highlights the idea that people are a product of their environment as much as their own choices. And when you look at Abdul Shahid's environment, you can't ignore the backdrop of Atlantic City.
Oh, yeah, it's a city that has always had this kind of duality to it. On one hand, you've got the glitz and glamour of the casinos, the promise of wealth and excitement. But on the other hand, there's a long history of poverty, crime, and a system that doesn't always offer equal opportunities.
Right, it creates this kind of pressure cooker atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
especially for a young Black man in the 70s and 80s, surrounded by the allure of easy money, but the legitimate paths to achieving that success can feel blocked. It's not an excuse for his actions, but it helps us understand the context.
And then there's the role of the Nation of Islam in his life. At first glance, it seems like a positive influence, steering him towards self-reliance and community. But was there a darker side to that ideology, too?
That's a really important question. The Nation of Islam during that era was complex. They were advocating for Black empowerment, but some of their teachings, particularly around self-defense and the idea of a separate Black nation, could be interpreted in a way that justified violence.
So it's possible that while the Nation of Islam gave him a sense of purpose and belonging, it also might have contributed to a worldview where violence was seen as a legitimate means to an end.
It's certainly something worth considering. And when you look at the scale of his drug operation, it's clear that he was a highly intelligent and organized individual. He wasn't just reacting to circumstances, he strategizing, building a network, exploiting vulnerabilities in the system.
That brings us back to the Gold Crown incident. What do you make of that? Was it a pure power play, a way to intimidate rivals and assert his dominance?
There's definitely an element of that. It's a deliberate flaunting of wealth and a message that he's not afraid of anyone. But I wonder if there's also a psychological component at play here.
What do you mean?
Well, remember his nickname, Midget Molly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's been underestimated his whole life. Maybe the crown, the flamboyance, was a way of overcompensating, of demanding the respect he felt he was denied.
It's like he's saying, look at me now, you can't ignore me.
Exactly. But of course, that kind of attention comes with a price. His high-profile lifestyle made him a target for law enforcement. And that 7-month investigation that led to his arrest, that wasn't a coincidence. They were watching him, waiting for him to slip up.
It's a classic case of hubris, isn't it? He got so caught up in his own image, his own power, that he lost sight of the bigger picture.
And it cost him everything. He lost his freedom, his empire, even that symbolic gold crown. It's a stark reminder that no matter how high you rise, the fall can be swift and brutal.
But even in prison, Something shifted for Abdul Shahid. It's like he went through another transformation, one that ultimately led him towards a path of redemption.
This is where the story gets really fascinating, because it challenges our assumptions about what redemption really means. Can someone who has committed such serious crimes truly change? And what does that change look like?
Those are questions that a lot of people grapple with, especially when it comes to the criminal justice system. We tend to label people based on their worst actions. But what about their potential for growth and rehabilitation?
Right, and in Abdul Shahid's case, we see him coming out of prison with a completely different mindset. He dedicates himself to helping young people avoid the mistakes he made. He becomes an advocate, particularly for incarcerated Muslims. And he even founds the D-Bear Youth Foundation to address issues like gang violence, drug use, and teen pregnancy.
It's almost like he's trying to make amends for the harm he caused, not just through words, but through action.
Yeah, and it raises so many questions about the nature of redemption. Is it about atoning for the past, about preventing others from making the same mistakes? Or is it something more internal, like a shift in perspective and values?
And how do we as a society measure that change? Do we look at actions? Do we consider motives? It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Especially when you consider the public fascination with his story. 2 books have been written about Abdul Shahid, and there's a clear interest in his life, both the highs and the lows. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's the inherent drama of it all, right? You've got this almost Shakespearean rise and fall, the religious upbringing juxtaposed with the criminal empire, the $1 million crown and the prison bars, and then this quest for redemption.
Yeah, it's like a modern morality play. It forces us to confront our own beliefs about good and evil, about second chances, and about the possibility of transformation.
And it speaks to something universal, this idea that everyone has a story, that even those who make terrible choices can still find a path towards something better.
Yeah, it reminds us to look beyond the labels we assign to people, to see the complexity of the human experience. And that's a powerful message, especially in a world where it's so easy to reduce individuals to headlines and sound bites.
So what do you think is the most important takeaway for our listeners from this deep dive into the life of Hakeem Abdul Shahid?
I think it's a reminder that we should always strive to understand the context of someone's actions. You know, it's not about excusing criminal behavior, but about recognizing that there are often these complex social, economic, and personal factors at play.
And it's a challenge to examine our own biases, too. Are we more willing to accept the idea of redemption for certain types of people than others? Do we truly believe in second chances? Or are we quick to judge and condemn?
Those are questions worth pondering.
Right.
And ultimately, I think Abdul Shahid's story encourages us to engage in these difficult conversations, to challenge our assumptions, and to consider the possibility that people can change, even in those unexpected ways.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring the life of a figure who defies easy categorization, from devout beginnings to notorious criminal to advocate. Hakeem Abdul Shahid's story leaves us with more questions than answers. But that's the beauty of a deep dive, isn't it? It sparks curiosity and encourages us to keep exploring.
Absolutely. The world is full of these compelling narratives, just waiting to be uncovered and examined. So let this be a reminder to keep asking questions, to keep digging deeper, and to always be open to the unexpected turns that life and stories can take. All right, so are you ready?
Ready for what?
Well, for a deep dive, obviously. Today, we're going to be looking at Sinika Shakur, using excerpts from his Wikipedia page. And
Wikipedia?
Yeah, his Wikipedia bio specifically. And just let me tell you, this is not your typical gangster story.
Right.
Like, this guy, he went from literally calling himself Monster
Monster.
to, like, challenging the systems that kind of created him in the first place.
Yeah.
It's wild.
That's the question, right? Can you, like, escape your past?
Totally. Like, can you ever really outrun where you came from? And in his case, I mean, where he came from was pretty,
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
It's rough to even read about it. Like, he was born Cody Scott.
In 63.
Yeah, 1963.
Yeah.
And, like, right from the start, his dad was abusive. His mom was working, like, every job she could just to get by.
Not exactly, a stable environment to grow up in.
Not at all. Makes you wonder, like, how much of a choice he even had, you know?
Yeah. And that's where the pull of the streets comes in, right?
Yeah.
Especially with Stanley Tookie Williams around.
Oh, yeah. Tookie Williams and the West Side Crips, huge presence in his neighborhood.
And this isn't just, like, some abstract gang influence. We're talking about Williams later in life, like expressing remorse for being a bad influence on Cody.
Oh, wow. Like actually feeling responsible for...
Yeah,
Yeah.
for leading him down the wrong path. Imagine that, right? Being a kid, seeing that kind of power, that violence, and then the guy behind it all says, hey, sorry I messed you up.
Yeah, that's heavy. Talk about like a messed up mentorship or something.
But twisted, totally.
And it's in that environment that at 12 years old, Cody gets initiated into the A-Tray Gangster Crips.
12 years old.
Yeah. And, the jumping in ritual is basically just getting the crap beaten out of you on.
Welcoming you to the gang, right? But with fists.
Brutal. Like, that's your intro to this life.
Yeah, no more watching from the sidelines. You're part of it now. And at that age,
Yeah.
it's going to change you, harden you.
And then just a year later, things get even more intense. He's 13, and he earns the nickname Monster after brutally beating a robbery victim.
It's hard to even, it's a horrific act. And it makes you wonder, right, how much did that name, that label stick with him? Did it become like a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Oh, totally. Like, does the name become the mask,
Huh.
Does it separate him from the violence or maybe even justify it in his mind?
Just like a shield, almost.
Yeah, a shield. And the violence just keeps escalating. At 14, he shoots at a fast food worker. He's in and out of juvenile detention. And then things really explode. Tookie Williams gets arrested for murder. The founder of the Crips, Raymond Washington, is killed. And it's all-out war between different Crip sets.
You got to remember, this is 1980s LA, right? Gang violence is everywhere. It's about turf, drugs, and just this constant fight for power, for survival.
Sounds like a war zone, honestly. And for a young man like Cody, violence becomes his whole world.
Yeah. And it almost consumes him. He's only 16 when he gets ambushed, shot 6 times. His younger brother, Kershawn, retaliates with a whole string of shootings.
Oh, wow. Just an endless cycle.
Endless.
Like, at this point, you'd think the story's already written, right? He's trapped, no way out.
Yeah.
But then there's this twist. He ends up in prison.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to shift.
And it all begins with a pretty unexpected encounter. He meets members of the Republic of New Africa movement.
Wait, the group that wants, like, a separate black nation within the U.S.?
That's the one. Pretty radical, right?
Yeah.
And they expose him to this whole new way of thinking, ideas about self-determination, black empowerment.
And for someone like him,
Yeah.
struggling with who he is, where he fits in, I can see how that would be powerful.
Oh, absolutely. It's like he's finally given a new lens to view the world through. And that's when the real change starts happening. He reads everything he can get his hands on, educates himself, and eventually changes his name to Sonika Shakur.
He sheds that monster persona
Mm-hmm.
and chooses a new identity. It's like a rebirth, right?
Yeah, it's a complete rejection of the path that was laid out for him. He's saying, I'm going to create myself.
It's a powerful statement. And when he gets out of prison in '88, there's a glimmer of hope. He marries his girlfriend, Tamu.
Seemed like he's building a new life, right? But of course, with Sonika Shakur, it's never that straightforward.
Right, because in 1991, he's back in prison. Assault and grand theft auto.
And while he's locked up, something massive happens. The 1992 LA riots.
Whoa, hold on. He's in prison while his city is burning, while members of his old gang are out there in the chaos.
It must have been surreal, like watching a nightmare unfold from a distance, but still feeling connected to it.
Yeah, connected through his past, his people.
It's like a forced reflection, a moment to really grapple with the consequences of the life he left behind. And it's during this time that he writes Monster, the autobiography of an LA gang member.
It's like he had to write it at that point.
Yeah.
Like to make sense of it all, for himself and for everyone else.
It's more than just a memoir, though. It's a raw look at gang life, a commentary on society, and a warning about how destructive these forces can be.
But even with all this transformation, his connection to the gang world, to the violence he grew up with, it's not completely severed.
And that's where things get really interesting. He forms a friendship with another Shakur.
You mean Tupac Shakur?
Wow.
Like the rapper, the icon?
Yep. And they weren't just like acquaintances. They had a genuine connection. It's fascinating, isn't it? He's trying to move away from his past, yet he's drawn to this figure who, in a lot of ways, represents the very culture he's trying to escape.
It's that push and pull, who he was, who he's trying to be. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Super complicated.
Yeah. So where were we? Oh, yeah, Sonika and Tupac. They're friends, right?
Yeah, and in '96, things get even crazier. Sonika's on the run from the police, and he ends up meeting up with Tupac on a music video set.
Wait, like a chance encounter? Yeah, but looking back, it's kind of eerie,
Yeah.
Like foreshadowing. because it turns out to be the last time they see each other.
Because of what happened to Tupac, you mean?
Exactly. Just a few months later, Tupac's murdered in Vegas. Tragic.
Absolutely tragic.
And Sonika, he's still wrestling with his own past, trying to find his way, and he decides to do something pretty bold. He interviews Orlando Anderson, the guy who's supposedly shot Tupac, for Vibe magazine.
Whoa, hold on. He actually talked to the alleged killer.
Yep, gets right to the source.
I can't even imagine. So what happened? What did Anderson say?
Well, that interview leads Sonika to another notorious figure, Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records. He's locked up with Anderson at the time.
Suge Knight. Okay, yeah, this is getting intense. So what went down between them?
It's like something out of a movie. Knight claims that Tupac owed him money, even though Tupac had sold millions of records.
Really?
Yeah, and he talks about controlling Tupac's possessions, the whole thing. And then Knight confirms that, yeah, Anderson was the one who killed Tupac.
Wow. That's chilling. It's like a glimpse into this whole dark side of the music industry. The world Tupac was caught up in, you know. The power, the danger.
Absolutely. And for Sonika, it's got to be another layer of tragedy, another reminder of the violence that seems to follow him, even as he's trying to build a new life.
It's like he can't escape it. But even after all of that, he doesn't give up. He keeps writing, trying to make sense of it all.
Right. He publishes his first fiction book, Thuglife, and later a collection of essays called Stand Up, Struggle Forward.
So it's not just about his past anymore. He's tackling bigger issues, right? Like race, class,
Sure.
the impact of trauma.
Yeah, for sure. You see a more like introspective, analytical side of Shakur in these works. He's pushing himself and his readers to think critically about, the systems that create inequality and violence.
And even when he's back in prison at
Yeah.
Centinela and Solano, he's still finding ways to use his voice. He's part of the Uncuffed radio program, right?
That's right. He's always looking for a platform to share his thoughts, to start a conversation, to challenge the way things are.
It's like they can lock him up, but they can't silence him.
You said earlier that his transformation in prison seemed like inevitable, but I wonder about that.
What do you mean?
Well, lots of people go to prison and don't come out with such a radical change in their thinking. What was different about Sonika? Was it meeting the Republic of New Africa? Was it his hunger for knowledge? Or was there something more, something within him all along?
It's a good question. Maybe he was just a seeker,
Yeah.
always questioning, challenging, pushing himself to grow.
Yeah, despite all the setbacks, all his flaws, there was this drive in him to break free from his past, from the limitations placed on him.
It really makes you think about the power of personal change,
It does, but it also highlights how complicated that change is. It's not a straight line. There are going to be bumps, wrong turns, even steps backward.
And for Shakur, there's this tragic irony. He spends his life trying to create a different future, and he ends up living in a homeless encampment.
It's a world away from the violence of his youth, but it shows that the path to redemption isn't always easy or pretty.
Yeah, and it reminds us that even with personal transformation, the past leaves scars. And coming back to society, especially after prison, especially with his history, it can be incredibly tough.
It makes you wonder about the support systems that are or aren't in place for people who've been incarcerated, especially for those who've challenged the system itself.
Like, are we setting them up to fail?
It's a tough question, but one that Shakur's story forces us to ask. But it also makes what he did achieve even more impressive. He went from monster to author, activist, a voice for the voiceless.
And his death in 2021 from a stroke, it doesn't erase that impact. The power of his words, the questions he raised.
You asked earlier, can someone truly escape their past? I think Shakur's life, with all its ups and downs, contradictions, gives us a complicated answer.
Yeah, because on one hand, he never fully outran his past. The violence, the trauma, it was always there.
But on the other hand, he never stopped trying to move beyond it. To learn, to grow, to make amends. And in that way, maybe he did find a kind of freedom, a freedom that wasn't about his circumstances, but about who he was inside.
It's a powerful idea that even within the limitations of his life, he found a way to redefine himself, to challenge the story that had been written for him.
And through his writing, he challenged us to do the same, to look past the labels, the judgments, and see the humanity in everyone.
It's a message that's so important today, when it's so easy to divide people, to put them in boxes. Sonika Shakur's life reminds us that we're all more than our pasts, that we all have the potential to grow and change.
And that even when things are tough, when it seems impossible, we can choose a different path.
Okay, before we move on, I want to go back to something you mentioned about the 92 riots. You said it was like this huge moment of reflection for Shakur. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. Imagine being locked up while your city is on fire. Knowing that your former gang is out there, caught up in the violence. It must have been surreal, like a bad dream you can't wake up from.
He was physically removed from the chaos, but still connected to it through his past, through the people he knew.
Exactly. And I think that experience, that perspective, really shaped his writing. It gave him this unique understanding of the riots, of the years of tension that led up to them.
He wasn't just some observer. It was personal for him.
Yeah, definitely. And that made his writing so powerful, so raw. He wasn't afraid to name names, to call out the hypocrisy he saw, both in the gangs and in the larger systems that create inequality.
It's like he was saying, I was there. I saw it. This is what you need to understand.
Exactly. And by telling his own story, he made people confront their own biases, their own ideas about gang members, about the communities they come from.
He's saying, look, I did terrible things, but I'm also a human being. My story is complicated. It's not so simple.
And that's what makes his work so important. It breaks down stereotypes and reminds us that there's humanity in everyone, even in the most unexpected places.
It reminds us that even in the darkest places, there's still hope for growth, for change, for finding a different way.
And that's a powerful message, especially in a world that's so quick to judge.
When we talk about Sonequa Shakur and the impact of environment, what are we really getting at here? Because that seems like a huge part of his story.
Absolutely. His childhood was rough. Poverty, abuse, gangs everywhere. It's hard to imagine a tougher environment to grow up in.
And those early experiences, they definitely shaped his choices, the path he took.
But what's important to remember is that where you come from doesn't determine who you are or who you can become.
And Shakur's transformation in prison, that proves it right. He chose to educate himself, to challenge his own beliefs, to break free from the violence.
It wasn't easy, and he stumbled along the way, but he never gave up on trying to be better.
That's so inspiring. It tells us that even when things are hard, we have the power to change, to rise above our circumstances.
But we also have to acknowledge that it's not always that simple. There are systemic barriers. Poverty, racism, lack of education, lack of resources. Those things make it incredibly difficult for some people to escape violence, to escape poverty.
So it's not just about individual willpower. We have to address the bigger issues, the systems that create these problems in the first place.
You got it. Sonequa Shakur's story shows us that we need social change. We need to create opportunities for people who've been marginalized, left behind.
It reminds us that we all have a part to play in breaking down those barriers and building a better world, a more just world.
And that's a conversation we need to have, especially now. Sonequa Shakur's life may be over, but his story is still relevant. It challenges us to be better, to do better, to make a world where everyone has a chance to succeed.
I think we need a minute to process all of that. Phew, man, that was heavy.
Yeah, no kidding.
Sonequa Shakur's life really makes you think.
Doesn't it? It's just so many layers, individual choices, but also like the whole system, And then what does it even mean to find redemption after all that?
Yeah, and that question we started with, can someone truly escape their past? What do you think after going through all this?
I don't know. It's tough. Like, on the surface, you could say no, not really. The things he did, the things that happened to him, they stayed with him.
That monster label, it followed him everywhere, even when he was trying so hard to be someone different.
Right. But here's the thing. He never stopped trying to change. He kept learning, pushing himself, even when he was back in prison. That fight to become more than his past, that's going to count for something, right?
It's like finding a different kind of freedom, almost, like inside himself.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message for anyone, anyone who's struggling with their past, with things they regret. It tells us that it's possible to change, to grow, even when it seems impossible.
But we can't forget about the bigger picture either. His story isn't just about him. It's about the systems that keep people trapped in poverty, in violence.
Absolutely. He's showing us how those systems work, how they impact people's lives.
Like, look, I messed up, but I mess up in this context. And that context, those systems, that's on all of us.
Right. And that's a challenge, isn't it? It's not enough to just blame individuals. We have to address the root causes of these problems.
Okay, so what can we do? Like, what can people listening actually do with this knowledge? It's so big,
Yeah.
It feels overwhelming.
I get it. It's easy to feel powerless. But Shakur's life, it gives us a few ideas.
Like what?
First, Just become aware. Educate yourself. Read his books. Learn about gang culture, about what was happening back then. The more you understand, the more you can do something about it.
Don't just believe everything you hear.
Right.
Dig deeper, question things.
Exactly. And talk about it. Have those tough conversations with people. Share what you've learned. Push back against the status quo. Ask the hard questions.
Because if we don't talk about it, nothing changes.
Yeah. And remember, change starts with us. Look at your own biases, your own prejudices. We all have them. And work on changing those ways of thinking.
It's a process, right? It's a journey.
Totally. And it's not always easy. But just like Shakur never stopped trying to transform himself, we can't stop working for a better world.
So for everyone listening, what's the one thing you'd tell them to do now?
Go read something by Sonika Shakur. Let his words sink in. Let them challenge you. Let his story inspire you to make a difference.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive. It's been incredible.
Thanks for having me. It's been a privilege.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. And until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a world where everyone can thrive.
All right, so today we're diving into the story of Nicky Barnes. This guy's story is as fascinating as it is complex.
Yeah, you've probably heard the name.
Yeah.
Maybe from like portrayals in movies or something like American Gangster.
Exactly. But today we're going deep. We're going to uncover the real story behind the man they called Mr. Untouchable.
Mr. Untouchable, yeah. What a story.
We've got excerpts from his Wikipedia article, and we're going to use that to kind of trace his journey. From the streets of Harlem, all the way up to the heights of his criminal power.
All the way to the top.
And then down to his ultimate downfall.
Yeah. And you know what's so fascinating about Barnes' story is how much it, like, challenges that typical gangster narrative.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this isn't just some guy born into a life of crime. He was born in Harlem. Yeah. And he had a really tough childhood, escaping an abusive father. But his path to becoming a kingpin wasn't a straight line. Not at all.
No, it wasn't like preordained or something. He had to kind of get there. And, you learn about his early heroin addiction. And it's almost like foreshadowing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
To the empire that he'll go on to build later. But then he overcomes that addiction in prison, which is, it's like a level of willpower you wouldn't necessarily associate with a future crime lord.
Right. Like, you think of these guys. You got to be like, it's like giving into those impulses.
Yeah.
But he showed this incredible self-control.
Yeah.
And, that's where things get really interesting. It's in prison, where his life takes like this total turn.
Right.
He meets this Colombo family,
The Lumbo family.
Crazy Joe Gallo.
Crazy Joe Gallo.
And that's when things get really interesting.
So wait, we've got an Italian mobster mentoring a black gangster. That's not an alliance you see every day.
Especially back then.
Yeah, especially back then.
No, you're right. It really speaks to how the landscape of organized crime was changing.
Yeah.
Gallo was this really shrewd operator. He saw an opportunity in Harlem.
Yeah.
This untapped market. And he recognized Barnes's potential.
He saw something in him.
He did. Yeah. And, he didn't just offer advice. He actually went out of his way to provide a lawyer for Barnes. And that lawyer helped get Barnes' conviction overturned.
Wow. So in a way, Gallo kind of like paved the way for Barnes's rise.
He did, yeah. It makes you wonder how things would have turned out.
Right.
If that hadn't happened.
Totally different story.
It's a real turning point.
Yeah.
Barnes gets out of prison. Not only is he free, but he's got all this knowledge now, all these connections. He knows how to build a criminal empire.
And that's exactly what he does.
He does?
He forms the council in 1972, a 7-man syndicate.
7 guys.
That would control a huge chunk of the Harlem heroin trade.
Unbelievable.
But when you say the council, it sounds more like a board meeting than a drug operation.
Right.
Was that intentional?
Oh, absolutely. Barnes was very deliberate. He modeled the council after the Italian mafia families.
Oh, wow.
He knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about brute force. It was about structure, hierarchy, presenting a united front.
It's like he was bringing a corporate model to the drug trade.
He was. That's a great way to put it.
Which is kind of ingenious in a way, if you can even call it that.
Yeah, if you can call it that. But it was incredibly effective.
Yeah.
By 1976, their reach extended way beyond Harlem. It went throughout New York State, Pennsylvania, even into Canada.
Wow.
We're talking a massive network. Lieutenants, distributors,
street dealers.
All operating under the counter.
Under the umbrella of the council,
Yeah.
and at the head of this empire is Mr. Untouchable.
Mr. Untouchable himself.
And let's talk about the lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the stories about Barnes' wealth.
Extravagance there.
Legendary.
Legendary. I mean, this guy was living the high life, no doubt about it. We're talking fleets of luxury cars, Bentleys, Citroens,
Maserati.
anime suits, Italian shoes, jewelry worth millions.
Millions.
He flaunted his wealth.
Which is interesting because it seems like he's completely disregarding the whole like low profile thing.
Right. You'd think he'd want to stay under the radar.
Yeah.
But he was almost like wanted to be seen.
Was it arrogance? Or was there something more strategic at play?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Some people say it was calculated. You know, he wanted to intimidate his rivals, project this aura of invincibility.
Don't mess with me.
Don't mess with me. Exactly. But others think it was just his ego. He wanted to revel in his success.
He earned it.
He did. In his mind, anyway.
Right. And, you know, this flamboyant lifestyle, it catches up with him eventually.
Right.
It does.
Wasn't it a New York Times Magazine article that kind of sealed his fate?
Are you talking about the one where he's posing on the cover?
Yeah.
With the headline, Mr. Untouchable.
That's the one. I mean, it seems like a move that would backfire.
You think?
Yeah.
It did. The article, it was meant to showcase his power, but it totally backfired. It enraged President Carter, who then ordered the Justice Department to make Barnes's prosecution a top priority.
It's like the article put a target on his back.
Yeah.
In a way that nothing else had before.
Exactly.
So Mr. Untouchable gets touched.
He gets touched by the long arm of the law. What a humbling experience that must have been.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
What happens next?
Well, Barnes is eventually convicted in 1978 and sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Oh.
But that's not the end of the story. In fact, I'd argue that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay. I am all ears. What happens to Mr. Untouchable behind bars?
Well, he discovers a different kind of betrayal, one that leads to a major shift in his outlook and his actions.
Okay, hold on. We got to unpack this. What kind of betrayal are we talking about?
So remember, Barnes built his empire on a foundation of loyalty, strict rules. Imagine his surprise when he finds out that one of his most trusted council members, Guy Fisher, was having an affair with his missus.
No way.
Yeah.
So even in the criminal underworld, there are lines you don't cross.
Apparently so.
Wow.
And for Barnes, this was a breaking point, this betrayal, plus the realization that his assets were being neglected, legal fees unpaid. That's what fuels his decision to become a federal informant.
Wait, Mr. Untouchable, the guy who built an empire on secrecy and loyalty, turns on his own organization.
He does.
Why?
It was revenge and a desire to dismantle everything he had created. He gave over 100 names to the authorities, including 5 council members and even his own wife.
Wow. From kingpin to informant. What a fall from grace. But was it a calculated move to salve himself? Or was there something more to it?
That's the question, isn't it? Was it pure self-preservation, or was there some genuine remorse? A reckoning with the consequences of his actions.
Yeah.
It's something we'll definitely explore as we delve deeper into his life after prison.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The rise of Nicky Barnes, the creation of his empire, his shocking downfall. But as you pointed out, it doesn't end there. There's a whole other chapter to uncover, and I, for one, I'm ready to hear more.
Yeah, me too. This is where things get really interesting. Let's dive in.
So we left off with Nicky Barnes behind bars, right? He turned informant, brought down his own empire. You'd think that'd be the end of the story. Classic rise and fall.
Yeah, you'd think so, right? But prison's actually where things take a real turn.
Oh, really?
It's a fascinating contrast. You know, this notorious crime lord, this guy who's all about luxury and power. Now he's stuck in a cell, but it's in that environment that he kind of seems to go through a change.
The transformation.
Yeah, exactly.
What's that look like, though?
Well, for one thing, he starts winning poetry contests in prison.
Poetry contests.
Poetry contests.
Wow.
He earns a college diploma with honors, starts teaching English to other inmates.
It's like he's trying to redeem himself.
It really does seem that way.
Make amends for his past.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, was there always like this other side to him?
Right.
Like a side that was hidden
That's possible.
while he was running his empire?
It's definitely possible. And it's also worth noting that because he cooperated with the authorities, he gets a reduced sentence.
He does?
Yeah, he's released in 1998,
1998.
decades earlier than his original life sentence.
So the guy who helped dismantle a massive drug empire gets out early,
It happens.
Because he flipped.
It's the criminal justice system in action.
Right.
Some might say it's a necessary evil
To catch the bigger fish.
to bring down these huge organizations, but others might question if it really serves justice.
Right, right. So he gets out. What does he do?
Well, he enters the witness protection program,
Witness protection.
which is a pretty big step.
It
It
is.
says a lot about wanting to leave his past behind.
Mr. Untouchable disappears.
He does. He pretty much vanishes from public life.
So he trades notoriety for anonymity, like a second chance, but a hidden one.
Exactly. But he doesn't stay silent forever.
Oh,
In 2007, he publishes a memoir
a memoir.
called Mr. Untouchable, My Crimes and Punishments.
Wow.
And he even participates in a documentary with the same name.
So he's back in the spotlight, but this time on his own terms.
Exactly.
What's he trying to say, though?
I think he's trying to control his own narrative, offer his perspective on everything that happened. He doesn't shy away from the darker parts of his past either. He admits to being involved in 8 murders.
8 murders.
Yeah,
That's a lot to reconcile with the image of him trying to redeem himself.
it is. And yet both sides seem to be a part of him.
Right.
He even has a conversation with Frank Lucas,
Frank Lucas.
his old rival.
Wow.
Imagine those two.
Sitting down together, decades after their turf wars.
It's pretty wild, right?
Yeah.
It really shows how time changes things.
Yeah.
How the dynamics of the criminal world shift. Barnes and Lucas, they were products of a certain time and their meeting.
Yeah.
It shows how much things had changed.
So even with his past behind him, Barnes was still making news. I remember reading about his interview with Howard Stern back in 2008.
Yeah, he talked about life and witness protection. Pretty rare for someone to do that.
It is.
But it shows how willing he was to engage with the public, even with that veil of anonymity.
So Mr. Untouchable ends up living a quiet life,
A hidden life.
trying to make up for what he did.
Yeah. Well, that's where things get a little mysterious.
Okay.
We know Barnes died from cancer in 2012,
2012.
but his death wasn't reported until 2019.
7 years later.
7 years.
What?
Because of witness protection,
Ah.
his identity was kept secret,
Even in death.
even in death.
Wow.
It's like a final act of disappearing.
It is.
It's a real testament to the power of the program.
Wow. Talk about a final chapter.
I know.
It's like he vanished into thin air.
He did.
Leaving behind this legacy. That's both fascinating and controversial.
Definitely. And that legacy continues on. Mickey Barnes has been portrayed in so many movies and TV shows,
Oh, yeah.
like Sean Diddy Combs in Carlito's Way, Rise to Power,
Oh, right.
Cuba Gooding Jr.
Yeah.
in American Gangster,
Of course.
and more recently, Derek Baskin in the miniseries The Offer.
Whoa.
His story has become this cautionary tale
Yeah.
about the allure of the criminal world
Yeah.
and the danger that comes with it.
But it also makes you think about redemption.
Second chances.
And the choices people make when they're faced with these extreme situations.
Yeah.
So we've gone from the streets of Harlem to the top of a criminal empire, to prison, witness protection, and finally a death shrouded in secrecy. It's been quite a ride. What does it all mean, though? What's Nicky Barnes' lasting impact? Nicky Barnes, Mr. Untouchable. Built this whole empire, brought it down himself, tried to redeem himself maybe, but stayed hidden until the very end. It's a story that really gets you thinking.
It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a tough one to figure out. He was a ruthless crime boss, responsible for so much pain. But he also seemed capable of change.
Right.
Like he wanted to be better. He was seeking knowledge, even teaching others.
Yeah, the poetry, the college degree, you don't see that every day, especially
Right.
from someone with his past. Makes you wonder if it was all genuine.
Right. Or was it a way to get out of prison faster?
Exactly.
I can't really know for sure.
Yeah.
But we can look at what he did. He helped the authorities, took down his whole organization. That took a lot of courage, no matter what his reasons were.
And then he disappears. Witness protection. Writes a book. Does interviews. What was he after? Was it forgiveness? Was he trying to set the record straight?
Could be.
Or was he just trying to cash in
Yeah.
on being Mr. Untouchable?
It might have been all of those things.
Yeah.
He was a product of his environment,
Streets.
driven by ambition, the need for power. But he also seemed to want to make things right.
It's interesting, all the choices he made. Every step of the way, he had to decide what to do,
What was the best move?
knowing there would be consequences.
Always consequences.
First choosing to be a criminal,
Right.
then betraying his own people, and finally disappearing completely.
Each choice had a huge impact.
He did.
His drug empire caused a lot of pain.
So much suffering.
And then working with the authorities, it ended his empire. But it also raised questions about how we handle justice,
Yeah.
how we use informants.
And witness protection.
It let him live a quiet life.
Away from it all.
But it also left a lot of unanswered questions.
So what do we take away from all this? What can we learn from Nicky Barnes?
I think it reminds us that even the worst people are still human. They could do terrible things, but they can also change. And their stories, they make us think about justice and redemption and how complicated people really are.
It's a story that stays with you.
It does.
Nicky Barnes, a man who lived many lives, leaving behind a legacy that's both fascinating and troubling.
For sure.
We've given you the facts, the different sides of the story. Now it's up to you to decide what it all means. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life of Mr. Untouchable.